Now entering the Bitcoin Podcast Network.
Welcome to Hashing It Out, a podcast where we talk to the tech innovators behind blockchain infrastructure and decentralized networks. We dive into the weeds to get at why and how people build this technology and the problems they face along the way. Come listen and learn from the best in the business so you can join their ranks. Hello, everyone. Episode 29 of Hashing It Out. As always, I'm here with my co-host, Colin Couchet. Say hello, Colin.
Hello, Colin.
Nice. And today's guest, we have Alex Van Descent he is a UX designer for the Ethereum Foundation. Many of you already know who he is, but we want to talk to him about universal logins and the space in general. So welcome to the show. Why don't you give our audience a quick introduction as to like who you are, how you got introduced to the Ethereum space, and what you work on currently.
Hey, hi Curry, hi Colin. Thanks for letting me be on the show. I've been on the space for a while now. I've been working with the foundation since 2014. So that was before the Ethereum network launched, but after the pre-sale. And I'm pretty sure I am one of the first designers, and I think I was one of the first employees in the people to be employed and salaried in the foundation. So I've been here for a while, and I always been focused on how can we make this whole Ethereum thing less complicated and more simple for the end user, even if that means it gets more complicated for the engineers. That's what I've been doing for some time there.
That sounds definitely like a UX designer to me. Engineers will make it work, whatever. The end users will matter. I actually agree. No. It's a tough, daunting task to try and make these very complicated systems understandable to people who might not need to know all the gritty details that they currently have to. So my hat's off to you. That's a very difficult task to take on.
Oh, also, I am also sort of a developer. So I am very skeptical of designers who can't code not because I think everyone needs to code, because I think you need to at least understand what's happening under the hood. So you are not that guy that just thinks, "Oh, engineer will solve it," right? I think that's actually a common thing where both designers and engineers, like the engineer will get it. Oh, you'll build this thing, and then the designer will just throw a little coat of UX paint on it, and it will be easy to use. And on the other hand, designers who don't understand the code underneath can be the sort of people who I'm going to just build a solution, and it's like the engineers will magically make it work, and I don't care about real world limitations. And I think you need to be somehow a bridge between those two worlds.
What's difficult about that kind of this whole space is drastically different than how people have grown intuition when using the internet, which means that as a UX designer, you have to then deliver applications or use cases to them that give them the ease of use and convenience that they're associated with, while also providing security implications of holding your own keys, being responsible for your own information and data, and a kind of abstract away a lot of the difficulties associated with using blockchain infrastructure right now. It's, in my opinion, it's as a UX person, this is the most difficult space to be in, but also might be quite the most exciting, because you're enabling a lot of people really new ways of interacting with other people and taking control over their own lives again. But it's just incredibly difficult. What's been your experience in that?
I think I agree with you. I think it's exciting because there's a lot of work to be done, right? And I think in other areas, you sort of come in I mean, if you come in as a web developer now and want to build like a new social network and it's not blockchain related, you sort of know all the places where people have been, right? Oh, that's how the flow. That's where you start. That's the best login scenario. That's the best. There's a ton of research on how do you make the best sign up screen so that the user is signed up easily, right? And I think in blockchain, is sort of the opposite place where everyone is starting at the basics, right? Everyone's starting at, okay, let's suppose that every user is a single private key, and that's my user. And then you start questioning, oh, wait, what does that mean? What does signing up mean? What is onboarding mean? And then you have to recreate a lot of those steps. And I think it's an interesting challenge, and it's fun. I'm very happy that I am in this space.
What's more to that is that you actually this technology is built on public and private key cryptography, which has a lot to do with signing on to things or authenticating yourself for access to things, which means that we can then improve further on previous ways of doing things outside of just a simple username and password, which everyone is, I guess, it's very easy to do. There's a lot of conveniences of having a password, but like having public and private key cryptography baked into the foundational layer allows you to expand on that and make things much, much more secure, or even easier in some cases. And I think we'll get into that when we get into like universal logins. But like, how do you feel about that?
I really believe that like what we are doing is sort of going into making a very round way of trying to reinvent a bunch of, like, we are sort of reinventing a lot of the technology in the web because we really believe that it can be done much better in a much more secure way. And we want to like, and I think like by the end that we end up reinventing the wheel, we'll have a system that is more secure than what we have right now, but it can be as easy or even easier and more user-friendly than what we have right now, right? I really believe that we have this opportunity because I really think that the things we are doing are not just because, we want to blockchain things, so blockchain needs to be more complicated. Oh, let's do private key because everyone is a criminal and we don't want like the government to spy on us. I really think that like if you were reinventing the web right now, if you go back to the 90s, if you go back to the 70s, and like I would bet that actually those were missing pieces back then, right? Those are you should be using public key cryptography since the beginning. You should be training. You should be thinking about how your users are secure. You should be thinking about how do we keep like our data private? How do we avoid leaving our digital trails everywhere? How do we avoid getting all our information being just gathered and owned by a single huge company, right? Because I think that is the right way of doing it, of building a common infrastructure that in the end, we will have a better web for it.
Absolutely. But the problem back then was a lot of these things that we're doing now, they weren't really feasible back then, meaning that there was a lot of innovation that happened between now and then. I mean, could you imagine if we built a lot of our hashing on MD5? And to that point, if you've ever spoken to any gray hairs, sometimes, like I've actually had several times had conversations with some gray-haired developers who are still kind of stuck in the computing power of the time, and who I've said, yeah, I just MD5 all these screenshots just because it was really easy and quick, and I didn't really need to share it anywhere. And they're like, MD5? I'm like, yeah. And I go, I know it's insecure. They go, no, it's just too expensive. It costs so much computing power to do an MD5. I'm like, dude, it's like 2015, it's not the same thing. We can't. So like a lot of these cryptography techniques used to be a little more expensive than they even are now. They're the same cost, but computing power has gone up. Our resources are more available. We're able to do new things. And to that point, like I feel like, to get back on the UX train, because I really want to make this comment. Has anybody seen? You guys watch Silicon Valley at all? Because there's this episode where the Pied Piper develops their app and they release it to the world, and they only
the UX, the user testing that they do. I know, yeah.
They only shared it with other developers, and other developers are like, wow, this is amazing. And so they've got positive feedback from a very narrow focus group. And when they release it to the wild to the rest of the world, nobody could freaking understand it. The only one who could understand it were developers. And I feel like that's exactly the problem we're facing right now. And the barrier to adoption is the user understanding what it's adopting and why. And that is definitely a user experience problem. So you have one of the more interesting areas in the space, in my opinion.
I totally agree. I remember watching that episode as it aired, and I was identifying so much of it. I was like, this is my work, because there's a specific thing I found very, very telling, both of Silicon Valley and our industry, where like they released this product, as you said, and they were running like a user testing, and the users during the usability group, they're not getting it, and then the main developer just jumps into the room. And then he starts giving a 1 hour lecture on the basis of everything. And by the end of it, after like 2 hours talking to developers, everyone is excited about it. And I connect very deeply with that sensation, because I have been there. I've been in situations where I get into a room where people have no idea what I'm about to talk about. And then I need to give like a 40 minutes lecture on why blockchain exists, why it's fun, why it's cool. And then in the end, I ended up with a 5-minute demo of a very complicated app. And then everyone was excited, right? And I think that's exactly the moment we are on, where we are very excited about it, but it's such an out there experience that nobody else gets it.
Yeah, and I feel like the real challenge isn't going to be that. See, the top 20% are probably going to drive the adoption for the last 80%, but we're only even reaching out to the top 1% right now. And if we could communicate that top 20% within 5 minutes, then the top 80% will probably, the lower 80% will probably accept whatever experience you give them as being the best, because they listen to the 20% who drive innovation. The early adopters, whatever you want to call them. But the problem is even that 20% capture isn't there yet. And it's struggling. It's difficult for me because I talk to other engineers who aren't in blockchain, and they just kind of like roll their eyes. And I still feel like I'm fighting this like cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, lovey-dovey kind of like, well, not lovey-dovey, but this libertarian sort of like, the free market will rule everything, will destroy the banks and all this kind of stuff. And they don't understand that there's a whole nother innovation here that we are leveraging with blockchain through smart contracts and through decentralized storage mechanisms, such as IPFS or storage or what have you, that will enable a new way of building things, a new paradigm. And they don't understand the advantage to that. So they look at things and they go, well, why am I going to give up my mainframe system when, the response time on Ethereum is 14 seconds per block with a limit on how much gas can be consumed? I can't get the transactional throughput that I need. There's only 500K transactions I could get through per day. Per day? Yeah, per day. So it's like, that's not enough. But I'm like, okay, hold on. There's a whole other, like there's an innovation side of things here. You need to dump money into researching this stuff. And the problem is typically a presentation issue. So I'm really excited for your work, and I hope that you can condense even those 5 minutes into less than 10 seconds so that people can just instantly get it.
Well, I have another part of that that's maybe we're too early for this type of thing. Like, is the tech ready for us to be focusing so much time and effort into designing for the end user when like, I think realistically speaking, what the end user, when we have massive adoption, is going to be interfacing with something that's layers on top of what we have now. And the UX design is like, who is it actually for? Should it be for an end user, or should it be for developers who are building the layers on top of the infrastructure we're building now?
Okay, I'm going to go back to something Colin says, because I want to answer that question. It's a great question, but let's go back to something Colin said before, Corey. And I think like when I'm trying to convey to other people why we need that, where I and I'm trying to avoid this whole, oh, it's libertarian free market thing. I'm trying to give something universal. I love the example of Facebook, because Facebook has last over 1 billion active users. And I think at some point they were nearing 2 billion active users. And I mean, 2 billion people, if you get every social security number that you have in the US, if you add it to the equivalent of the social security number in Brazil and probably in the whole of South America, and then you add every single identity system, digital identity system in the European Union, you will not get to 2 billion people, right? That's how many users Facebook has information right now. And it's not only that for a lot of people, especially like in developing countries, Facebook is the internet, right? Facebook is the entrance for the internet. For a lot of those people, that is also the way they have access to all the freedom that the internet gives us, right? Freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of commerce, freedom of just being able to talk about politics or sell stuff with other people. I'm just talking about like your little guy who sets up an Instagram shop. Every one of those people have their whole identity and digital life tied to a single company. And that single company is majorly controlled by one single person. And it's crazy that like we have this one person that if they so decide can just turn the key and decide, you know what, I think all of this whole category of actions that people are doing, I don't want them in my platform, right? And that's obviously now how we can move together forward with the internet. If you want the internet to be this global phenomenon where everyone has access and freedom and access to information, etc., we can now, it cannot work if it's just controlled by like one single Mark Zuckerberg.
And so I think you should get back to Corey's question, but this kind of brings something up that really, to me, is something we have to communicate, is that we've been designing systems wrongly for identity, meaning that we haven't been building our privacy with the idea that somebody could violate a central user's or even as a central user violate its end user's trust. And so since we've been designing systems with this trusted element of centralization and like, yeah, we give our information to Facebook, Facebook's got it. We give our information to Equifax will never get breached. That's crazy. And then they wind up getting breached, or they wind up getting manipulated in some way, or they wind up selling data to people that we don't feel are using that data to sway political elections. And so we're not building our infrastructure of identity and information related to a person's independent identity in a way that will facilitate long-term, benefits to society, and eventually everything will get hacked. So if we build things in a hack-proof way, I don't want to call it hack-proof, but with the idea that you're putting your information out there and you are responsible for protecting your information, then the attack vector is you, and then you must be accountable. So I feel like this whole narrative of like centralization versus decentralization is very difficult to explain. I love the fact that you use Facebook because I actually use that regularly myself. But it's all about how we're architecting things, and people don't understand that there's another way. And that's what I feel like I'm trying to fight, is that there's another way, guys. There's another way to do this. And they kind of still see it as fantasy, or nobody will put all their information on the blockchain. It's public. I'm like, there's another way to do it so it's private. Like I don't know. It just feels to me like people don't accept that there is another way yet. And communicating that's still difficult.
Yeah, but and even if you start with the assumption that, look, it's people will never take care of their own private keys. People are not capable of that. But we can start with the assumption of let's not trust a central party for that, right? There are intermediary steps in between. All information is on Mark Zuckerberg's personal computer to everyone is an expert in cryptography, and they manage it. And I think the interesting thing is that Facebook starts at their end, and then they are like, oh no, but we are doing it in more secure way. We are adding more barriers to make sure that your data is safe. And we are starting in the other end where everyone is responsible for their own private data. And then we are trying to make it a little bit more easier, a little bit more accessible, a little bit more universal, and adding schemes where, oh, you're trusting this party, but here are the vectors of the trust. You trust them to do this, but not that. That's the limit on their trust. You can remove that trust at any point. And we are at every step of the way. We are trying to go slowly, and we are sort of going in the same direction. But I think order in our way will get there eventually. I think it's possible for us to start with the blockchain, this crypto crazy world, and get to a place where it's universally accessible. I think that's more believable than believe that Facebook will just become super safe, super secure, and we will always be able to trust Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I feel like circling back to my question, that is the reason for UX design at this stage, is basically making key management something that's reasonable thing to do for the end user. Because if we start where at the layer where everyone needs to secure their own things, and because people aren't ever going to all become cryptography experts, there may be a general gain in understanding and knowledge across the board, but it's not feasible to believe everyone's going to become an expert and have full understanding. So the UX design, the types of things of interfacing with private keys and this base layer infrastructure is important, because it allows allows us to come up with solutions that work in a secure manner for the everyday user. So as we keep building things, it's easy to onboard them. I feel like that's why UX design at this stage is important. Is there anything else that I may have missed, or is that completely off base?
Yes, I think that here's the thing, right? We also are always thinking about like the average. I believe that there is this myth of the average user, right? People believe that there is this average user elsewhere that is perfectly encapsulated by your grandmother, and whenever we reach your grandmother, we've reached everyone. And I don't think it's that. And I don't think that's the right way of doing it, because I think UX design is important since the beginning. I think it's important on every step of the way. It's just we are slowly expanding who the users are. At some point, one of the first things I did, and when Ethereum was launched, I was helping do the website, and just to install and run Ethereum and run a node, you had to install it was very complicated. You had to open the command line and type 10 lines of code, and I pushed them and I helped them to reduce that to 1 or 2 lines of installation. That is UX design, right? Reducing 10 lines in the command line to 2, that's sort of UX design, because there are users. I mean, not everyone is an equal developer. There are people who can open the command line and copy paste stuff, but not necessarily can paste 10 things and debug every step of the way, right? So we can start with there's this huge developer, and there's that guy who's just starting, is curious, wants to open. He's able to open the terminal. Okay, we are done with this guy. We've solved that problem. Now can we go to the next step, where someone is tech savvy enough to be able to download a software and sync up their chain and test something, and they want to be able to get their pre-sale wallet off their USB drive and save a backup elsewhere, and then get to an exchange without using the command line. Can we do that? Can we solve that? Yeah, we can solve that. And I was working on that. And then you go over to next level. Oh, is that the kind of user that would install Firefox? That's the kind of user that would install a Chrome extension. And then I think at some point we need to get to the kind of user that doesn't want to install anything, that doesn't want to download anything, or is not technically capable of that. And I think you cannot expect to jump directly to that guy if you haven't solved all the issues with, and if you haven't solved and learned from all those other more advanced users whose UX design matters, right? I don't think UX design is just making it shiny and pretty for your grandmother. It's also sometimes just making it so that someone who wants to learn more about Ethereum can follow an easy to follow tutorial. That's part of UX design.
So to relate a story that actually might help condense that down a bit, I don't know. That's a really good point. Is back in 1999, like 2002, 2003, something like that, I worked at a particle accelerator facility in Newport News, Virginia. Cool. And this was like my first job as a web development intern. And a lot of the scientists there refused to do just the most basic things. It was strange. They didn't enable cookies. So every time I tried to do certain types of redirects, it would fail the application for them. Some of them insisted on using links as a browser, which I don't know if you know what that is, but it's a command line browser. So it had absolutely no graphical capability whatsoever. And so my target audience for any application I built there was a moving target. So if I was building it for the science community, I had to make it as basic as possible. These guys wanted literally nothing, bare bones, just get it out there, get it working, simple forms, as basic as humanly possible. But if I was building it for the HR staff, then it's a totally different target audience. And so I think what we're trying to identify here is how can we move that target audience, put that target audience for these decentralized applications into the hands of people who want to use them now and not worry about the people who won't want to use them right now, but still broaden that gradually until we get a good paradigm going for anybody who wants to adopt it. And that will take years, but I think it's an interesting problem. So, kudos to you. One of the things that, I think is key to a lot of this is I built a decentralized application last year for a customer. And one of the pain in the ass things to deal with was that there was no good way to do logins. So I basically had to hard code or store some method of keeping a local copy of accounts. And those accounts would have to have their wallets in a folder on the decentralized application locally. The UI was good for selecting those accounts, but adding and removing those was kind of a pain in the butt, and people didn't understand it, and it was very much a barrier. So I wonder if you could talk a little more about how you're solving that problem with universal logins, and talk about the EIPs behind it.
Okay, so back and to go on to build on your story, and I think it's super important to think, because we talk about this average user and the top, like the early adopters, as if it's everyone is on a line and everyone is from like I'm very smart to I'm very dumb, right? And I think that's not the way to approach it, because there are people, and I'm pretty sure you met them, like there are people who are like high particle physicists who work in the particle accelerator, but are not able to set up their own email account. We're not able to set up their own email account in the 90s, right? And everyone is sort of like that, right? You might be a cryptography expert. That doesn't mean that you understand other areas. And even someone who has like real problems, right? Someone who's working, maybe someone is very good at working on their field, right? They have far more problems. They have to worry about either if their pigs are going to die or not. They don't really want to have to deal with all those things, and we just want to be able to get them a way for them to be able to sell their farm products out there. It doesn't mean that they're dumb. They probably have a lot more knowledge that we have no idea on. It's just that they don't have the bandwidth to learn all this new stuff. We just want to simplify it. And then, so going back to universal logins, one of the things that I've spent the last years since I've done a lot of things in the Ethereum Foundation, but my main project on and off was during all those years was Mist, which is a browser, which is like a wallet. It's, if you go to ethereum.org, that's like the main link that there is. You download the wallet. There is also a browser behind it. And we have always been trying to do how we can make the simplest thing possible, but there is a barrier there, which is the first thing that you need to do is download something, right? You need to download our browser. You need to download MetaMask extension, maybe you need to download an iPhone app. You need to download something. And most people do not want to download anything. They just want to go to a website and sign up. And I really wanted to think about how can we, in a way, figure out a solution where the onboarding is very easy, is very simple, and the user doesn't need to nor download anything. They doesn't need to write down a seed phrase, or they don't need to buy Ether, which is also like a huge problem, right? I'm pretty sure that if you work on a decentralized app, some of your clients probably ask you, why do I need to buy this stuff, right? I don't want to have to buy this new cryptocurrency thing to build my decentralized app.
Well, in my current case, I tend to use private Ethereum networks, but yeah, that would be that's pretty much why I use private Ethereum networks, is because they just want to prove to people that this is worth investing in. So it's not going on the mainnet. If it were, they would have to buy a bunch of ETH, which is a floating target of cost, compared to the fiat world, which still dominates our pricing structure. So yeah, no, I definitely would like a way to not have to pay, or have them even aware of, what's in their wallet.
Yeah. Also, another problem is that like most people have multiple devices, right? So they have their iPhone, they have their laptop, they have a desktop. Even how do you transfer your account from one to the other is a complicated thing, because we don't want people taking private keys from one place and taking to the other. And also the whole management of private keys has this thing I call the crypto paradox, right? Because we are telling people this private key is super important and you need to have a backup, right? You need to have a backup. So if you lose it, you lose all your money. But if you do too many backups and you forget it and you put it in your Gmail account and your Gmail is hacked, if you put it on iCloud, if you put it on too many USB sticks, it can leak, and then your money is also lost. So we have this crazy thing where you need to make just the right amount of copies, right? You make too many of them, it's leaked, you lose all your money. You make too few of them, you have some problem with your device, you lose all your money. And the solution that I'm pushing to others is actually, it's nothing new. It's something that's been around for a while, but I'm just trying to standardize it. Is the idea that instead of keeping your funds in private keys, you keep them on some sort of proxy contract, which is basically a multi-sig contract that allows you to it's a proxy contract that has code behind it. And the idea is that on every device you own, every device that you're using, you keep a different private key. You don't back those private key up. You keep the private key as buried as you can in each device, as safe as you can in each device, and then use those private keys not to keep an Ether, but just to sign message, and then you send that message to the proxy contract. And the proxy contract has the capability of understanding, oh, this is a signed message asking me to do X, Y, or Z, and that's what and it's able to do it. We're calling those signed message meta transactions, which is basically a transaction that it's almost a second layer of a signed transaction, right? You're not signing a transaction, you're signing a message telling a contract to do a transaction in your behalf.
It's just authentication at that's very basic level.
It's very similar to having an authorization token. It's very similar to having every device has an authorization token and you're just giving out authorization tokens, which is good because it means that if you lose one of your devices, you didn't lose all your money. You just lost one authorization token. And as long as you still have the capability of generating more authentication tokens, you can create more of them. And there's another cool thing of that is that someone needs to actually deploy those transactions on chain, right? But that doesn't mean that it needs to be you. what you can do is you take those meta transactions, you give it to anyone literally that has Ether, and they can be the one paying that cost for you. And because we are talking about a smart contract, one thing that you can do is you can sort of refund that person with some other tokens, and which comes back to your issue where, like, a lot of business, they don't mind having costs associated with what they're doing. They don't want to buy Ether because they have no idea how much Ether will be costing. And this whole architecture would allow you to actually run a whole app just using DAI. Because what you can do is that you can keep DAI on your, let's say, DAI or any other token really in your account, and then you're signing messages and paying those messages with some other token which is not Ether.
So how does this get around the whole need to back up a ton of keys problem? So let's say I have a authorized account on my cell phone. I have an authorized account on my laptop. I have an authorized account on my desktop, and I have an authorized account on my tablet. Okay, that's cool. And let's just assume they're different accounts, I think. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Yes. But I lose my cell phone. What do I do?
So the idea here is that there are multiple ways in which you can set it up, right? So one of the things you can do is, if you have already 5 devices, you can have a requirement to have at least 2 or 3 devices be able to sign in order to add a new device. So if you lose your cell phone, but you still have access to your iPad and your desktop, let's say, you can still use both of those to add a new device to it, to add your new phone. And another thing you can do is you can still do backups, but you can do a backup of keys that were never lying. So the idea is, instead of trying to back up the every key in every device, what you do instead, you generate brand new keys, you print them, or you put them somewhere very safe that is never online, print it, laminate it, keep it in your mother's house, in your bank, whatever. And then you can use that as a last resource recovery. So if you lose all your devices in a fire, you can still have access to those. If you can still have access to those recovery codes, you can recover your account. The added advantage is that because those recovery codes were never online in the first place, they were just generated offline, you were sort of tricking users. You're tricking users into doing the most secure way, because what I'm doing is that we can create a very easy flow for the user that in the end they created a multisig, they created a paper backup, which is a code storage, and they didn't need to realize any of those words or even know what they mean, right? They didn't know that they were creating a multisig, they didn't know what a code storage is, but still you're sort of tricking users into it.
So one interesting thing that this kind of spawns in my head is that since we're assuming a world with multiple devices for this, because a single device, this doesn't really seem to carry as much weight. But if you have multiple devices, this does seem to carry some weight, at least to me at this point. Maybe you have a different argument for that.
I agree. I am assuming that we are moving toward not only of multiple devices per user, per person, but that most devices are single users, right? We don't have the idea where we have a shared computer where multiple people log in and log out anymore.
So the idea that pops in my head is, okay, let's assume a minimum number of devices of, say, 4. Maybe that's not reasonable, but I think you could hear what I'm saying, and maybe you could even share with friends or something like that to make this happen. We could use shared keys to sort of encrypt and then send out the recovery codes so that you don't actually have to have a physical copy of the recovery code. You can just retrieve it through some sort of key sharing mechanism, which will enable you to decrypt the actual recovery code at will. And this way, you don't have to actually physically ever print out anything. As long as you have a minimal number of devices which have a key share for your recovery code, you can recover that recovery code.
Well, there's a whole slew of protocols and procedures you could use for doing authentication across multiple devices or backups for that matter. But the key idea here is that you're having a proxy contract that actually holds things, and it's almost a permissions layer for interacting with anything on the blockchain that only does things through various devices that have been authenticated, which is nice because you can do permissions around various devices which have different security profiles. Like my cell phone isn't as secure as my ledger, things like that. Or, you know what I mean? And so and that's reasonable for people because different accounts have different amounts of money in them, which have different amounts of risk, which have different amounts of security. And so there should be different permissions around the, I guess, attestations those private keys can make.
Also, because we are always thinking as like the base unit is a private key, we are always trying to think in terms of crypto primitives, right? So if you start saying about like, oh, we can do a Shamir secret sharing way of sharing the keys, so you don't need to actually print the keys, you can send them around. That's nice, and you can do that. But more importantly, is that all the logic is actually in a contract. So you don't need to, like, you can actually build much more complex recovery mechanisms where you don't need to resort to those crypto primitives. You can still use a key sharing method, but another thing you could do in theory and I think I believe some apps are actually developing it, like Status and things like that, is you can set up a trusted friend scheme where you say, look, I trust that person, that person, that person, that person. And if those three people can come together and agree, they can recover my device. With the difference between that and just doing a secret sharing with them is that at any point, because it's just smart contract logic, at any point you could, in theory, add more trusted friends or remove them, or even add things like saying, look, this is my account, this is my family members, and my family members are only allowed to try to recover access to my account if all my main keys do not make any transaction in like a full year, right? That's a more complex logic that you cannot do with crypto primitives, but you can do with smart contracts, and it sort of makes sense in our day-to-day world because, oh yeah, that's sort of how inheritance works, right? If I die and if I don't touch my keys for a whole year, then like those family members that I've picked, they are able to come together and sort of have access to my accounts. And I think it's important. So it's important to remember that we are talking about contract logic that can be upgraded, that can be created anew, that anything that you want to sort of any recovery scheme that you can just create on top of it.
Well, I love that. I worry about the security of smart contracts, and when people start implementing arbitrary code as the permissions layer for dealing with things dealing with their funds and blockchain, that those contracts could be have severe security vulnerabilities inside of them, and we're still not sure of all of the security guarantees of the contract language itself or the EVM and so on and so forth. And that's a moving target as well. So this is the right way to handle, in my opinion, having custodian of funds and this type of technology. But it's still very risky because you don't have strong guarantees around the contracts themselves.
Well, this brings up something that raise your hand. There's only three of us here, but tell me if you've used any functionality in a smart contract which required Turing completeness. No. Anybody? I know I haven't. I've done it for experiments, but it wound up being too costly, so it's not even worth it. Do we really need recursion capabilities? Do we really need infinite loops?
We don't know yet. I think it's too early to say whether or not we need it because a lot of the use cases
if you need a Turing complete version, I feel like that's another problem. Like that's something else you can totally do either in other ways or with another EVM that's more risky and there's a risk associated with it. But to me right now, it seems like just a simple language like Pact, which isn't Turing complete and formally verifiable, would probably benefit the system as it stands right now. So
here's the thing: we are sort of like in both of your questions, you're sort of questioning why do we have smart contracts at all, right? Or can we trust smart contracts at all to do the things that they want to do? And I know I see where you're coming from, but I have to disagree. I think that we want to be able, and I'm not talking about do we need Turing complete or not, but my point is we do need rich. I do really think that a rich environment where you can create more complex logic is good, is interesting, and is allow us to create a lot more things that we couldn't do before. Right? This whole universal login scheme that I described, it's very hard to do if you don't have a sophisticated smart contract logic that allows you to do things. And I'm not saying that every single user will write up their own smart contract, right? That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we can create a system that allows expandability. We can create a system that says, look, this is the basic system that where the user has control of their funds, and they can create, and there are a couple of extensible functions where they can say, look, I want to create a key that I'm giving it to, let's say, I'm taking this key, I'm giving to a subscription magazine that I want, and I'm authorizing that key to take as X amount of money per month. I'm using that other key, I'm giving that key authorization, just play with CryptoKitties, right? That key can sell my CryptoKitties, can breed my CryptoKitties. The only thing it cannot do is it cannot buy because it would require an extra key to confirm. And you can create those that extra logic. And of course, every time you add that extra logic, you need to be careful that you're not introducing new bugs. But I think we can create a base system that is a lot more complex than what we have right now with just base cryptographic primitives, but it still is simple enough that we can audit it, we can make formal proofs around it to make sure that it's safe.
This reminds me of a couple conversations I had at DEF CON with Grid Plus and their last one. Basically a hardware device. Did you talk with them or see them? Because a lot of what their functionality is based on the lattice one is what you're implementing in universal logins. And I feel as though this is becoming kind of pushed to the front of things people need to be worried about.
Which company is that again?
Grid Plus. It's a consensus spoke called Grid Plus, which is doing the energy. And their lattice one is a hardware device that is doing permissions around key management. And I mentioned this because as multiple companies and people work on these types of problems, they need to come together to come up with standards so they can be used across all of these different implementations.
Yeah, that is sort of so. The way I started doing this whole universal login thing was mostly because I started seeing all those solutions emerging in places, and I was just doing my thing where I go to people and I help them with different projects. And a lot of people had basically the same issues. Oh, I want to do this, but I don't want to have Ether. And I want to do this, but I want to have multiple users. And I would say, look, you can do there are solutions for this. You can do this sign message. You can do a EC recover. And I just sign a message and you can pay. You can create your token and you can pay fees on your token with the other token. All you need is a relayer. And then they would ask me, oh, wait, how do I do that? Oh, look, Status has a great EC recover thing. That other token there, they have a EC, they have a way which pay fees with the token itself. That other guy is doing an identity proxy that allows you to expand and have multiple keys. And I would receive blank stares because they were like, dude, I just learned how to make a ERC20 token like 30 minutes ago, right? You cannot tell me that I need to like learn how to make a decentralized relayer network. And then I decided, look, there are a lot of very good solutions that people are working and they are not compatible. So I really want to create standards for that, and that's how I end up writing 2 ERCs about it.
Well, standards are quite powerful. I mean, I think, in my personal opinion, the ERC20 Standard was the catalyst for the entire cryptocurrency boom, because it lowered the barrier of entry and allowed people to build infrastructure around trading these types of things because they all agreed on how to do it. And
you get a shitcoin, you get a shitcoin, you get a shitcoin, everybody gets a shitcoin.
And while it has potentially like negative consequences, it did a lot for the entire space in terms of bringing attention, massive innovation in terms of how we do things, and built a lot of infrastructure. And it's all around, in my opinion, a single standard. Those are powerful.
I mean, that's not at all accidental, right? That is sort of like the purpose of Ethereum in the beginning was, like, a lot of people we forget that people were already building shitcoins before Ethereum came around, right? But the idea is that before, in order for you to say launch Dogecoin, what you needed to do is you needed to fork like Bitcoin Core, and then you needed to have your own mining infrastructure, and you needed to convince miners, you needed to convince exchanges, and you
I remember those days.
Convince a bunch of people, right? So I want to create a new coin for everyone in Finland. Well, Greenland, right? Like Fiat coin was an airdrop for everyone in like Finland or Greenland or something like that. And then it was hard because you needed to have your own wallet, your own mining software, your own mining thing, and then you need to solve like P2P connections. And when Ethereum comes and just tells you, look, we are going to deal with the whole infrastructure, and you just build this new thing on top. I mean, all you want is just to build a token. The nice part of it is that, like, once you have a token, you can use any Ethereum wallet that supports token. You can use any Ethereum exchange that supports tokens, and then the infrastructure is already there, right? So exactly what you said, but that is sort of like the purpose of Ethereum was to build how can we allow people to share the infrastructure they are building, so that you can only need to focus on what we can do that is novel and interesting.
So let's assume, let's go the happy path. You're a UX designer. You UX design, and maybe even just socially design, so that people start using universal logins and proxy contracts the way that you hope and expect them to in ERC1075 identity. Let's assume we go down the happy path. What do you think the consequences of that be? What will be your shitcoin?
Okay, so the question you're making is, what do I think is the like, if everything I'm saying gets popular and gets adopted, what sort of bad outcomes I expect? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, because I think everybody kind of could have predicted shitcoins. And like, I feel like in this, I kind of have an idea where this would go, but I don't know yet. And I'm kind of, I just want to see if you have any predictions with regard to that. Do you have any thoughts?
So the whole idea is that I want to make onboarding very, very, very easy, right? The demo that I give to people is that you can, like, you log into the website, and all you need to do is type the username you have. In the next screen, you will receive a few tokens, and then the next screen, you're already like clicking a button that allows you to interact with a smart contract and uses that token that you just received for that. So it means that in like 30 seconds and in 2 clicks, basically, you are already interacting with a smart contract. So my idea is I really want to make smart contracts easy. And I would say that if I succeed on that, probably the first thing that would happen is we will probably multiply a lot of bad behavior that we see.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah. I thought you were going to say something else.
I wouldn't say scalability. That might be a problem. I think that's parallel. We can go into that. But I think we'll probably things like a lot of people like using pyramids and other like trading things and probably like what would be the lower barrier to entry would be probably a wallet where everyone can create their own wallet, everyone can create their own prediction market, everyone can create their own decentralized exchange. And probably we're going to see a lot of like bad Ethereum games and bad Ethereum products and things that are A little bit like CryptoKitty. I think CryptoKitty generated a whole new generation of games, which is nothing but just buy and sell stupid stuff, right? I can see it making it CryptoKitty even more popular, like crypto collectible assets or even more popular.
You're lowering the barrier to entry to people get these things and trade them, and in the process of doing that, you kind of like create an irrational exuberance around them because people can do it.
Exactly.
Which then leads to a scaling issue because CryptoKitties broke the network at the time when they were big. Because we end up like, what if the blockchain network basically becomes clogged with everyone trying to use these things that basically have no real utility, at least for now, and then it kind of buttons out into use cases that have good utility but only operate under low gas fees, and that's a problem that's going to be solved eventually.
That could only be good for Bitcoin. No, honestly though, if that kind of thing happens, the price goes up. So the market is supposed to balance itself out, and that's cool and all, but we still want to use the stuff. So I feel like things like layer 2 solutions and more things like Infura are going to be useful until we get some better scaling solutions on the layer 1 side.
Well, yeah,
and even then, I feel like layer 2 is going to be essential.
You can use this technology with layer 2 technologies. These aren't excluding each other. That's kind of the nice part about it.
Also, I think that is a sort of good problem to have, because I would say, and here's the truth, there are a lot more people working on scalability than people working on UX design and onboarding. And I think those are equally important because there's no point. I mean, the whole point of, I think the alternative is much worse, because if you fix scalability before we fix onboarding, we'll have a network that can handle billions of transactions, but doesn't have 100,000 users, right? And I think that's even worse. What's the point of having scalability if you can't reach 1 million users, 1 billion users maybe? And I would say that like the opposite, where we solve onboarding before we solve scalability, I don't think that's going to happen, because there are already solutions to that problem right now, right? You can do side chains, you can do, and one of the things that are interesting about the universal login solution is that you can actually have the same address for your proxy identity in multiple Ethereum networks. So you can use the same address in Winkerby, in mainnet, in your side chain, in your proof of authority sub chain, things like that, and you can sort of use the same identity and the same login in all of them.
And that's really useful for things like plasma chains. And
yeah, exactly.
And actually, what's even cooler is that if we could nail this down, really, you can create a general state channel to another contract on another chain network entirely and do asset transfer that way pretty simply, and only have one system which maintains the sort of like, yeah, that could be cool for an atomic swap site type system that's just easily managed, because right now it's kind of a pain in the butt in my opinion. But I don't know, I'm kind of thinking about that. That is a good property of this for sure.
Well, we're hitting about an hour now. Are there any questions that we should have asked you? You hoped we asked you that we didn't get around to saying?
No, I think we had a nice conversation, and well, I don't know there's any particular question that people I think we hit all the usual questions that where that goes.
Well, then the obvious next part is, what's the next steps? What do you hope happens now that you've been going around? We saw you at the Status Hackathon. You're at DEF CON. You've been going around trying to teach people about universal logins. Now that you have like kind of this minimum viable product of people to implement them, how do we get it into people's hands? What do people need to do in order to start pushing this forward and making it a real thing?
So one important thing to understand is that some people don't get it clear when I speak it on the first time, is that universal logins is not one solution. It's not like one way of doing it. It's not one app that you download where everything goes through that app, right? And there are other solutions that do that, but it's not that. It's really just a common architecture that I'm hoping a lot of people are adopted. And I've been doing that this whole tour where I went to Crypto Life, I went to DEF CON, I went to the Decentralized Finance Summit, I went to and I'm doing a lot of that. And my hope is that I really want to have some players in the Ethereum ecosystem use that and adopt it. And I think that's going on because I've been talking with a lot of people in different companies, some people like Status or Gnosis or smaller companies, and they're all very excited about this idea of having a common standard where everyone can share. And one of the things that they like is this idea where you go into Status, and then during the onboarding process, Status gives you a Status username. And then the next thing that happens is that you go to Gnosis, let's say, and you can use your Status username in Gnosis. So it's almost if you were onboarded once in any app, you're already onboarded on every Ethereum app. And I think that's something that excites a lot of people because it really helps. It multiplies the onboarding effect. So my
go ahead. So that actually, I know that we're coming to the end here, and I shouldn't probably be asking more questions, but just kind of triggered something else in me that I've dealt with a long time ago. And I brought up on the show several times that back in 2005, I tried to develop something called onlinekarma.net. Didn't pan out, wrong timing, right idea, I feel, where, your reputation kind of went with you from site to site to site. And so you didn't have to fragment between like your eBay rating and your Amazon rating and your, web forum XYZ rating. And they all kind of would build a centralized way of managing that. What do you feel about reputation tied to your login? Do you feel like those things are something and tracking where your login's been used and the history of your login? Like, how does that integrate into your vision for this?
There are two things there, right? I think the first one is the nice thing, which is I think you should and I think it's obvious for anyone who's probably listening to this podcast agrees, in which you should own your own data, right? Like your Uber rating should not be it should be your rating. It should be your reputation as a driver, should not belong to Uber, should not be your Uber rating, because it creates. And I think you're right. Like if you have a good reputation as a driver, you should be able to go to another driving network and use your reputation there.
Or your insurance company.
Or an insurance company, or just remove lock-in from Uber, right? Why do you have to start anew if you want to go to a Uber competitor? I think that's a wrong approach. So I think it should belong to you. And also, but in the other hand, I think that's something that the Uport guys are really, really, really like spreading the word, is that we should also avoid making it on-chain as much as possible. We should try to make a lot of those reputations, we should be very careful of them, especially if you're talking about something that is on-chain forever. Because like right now, what can be a good reputation can be like in 10 years can be turned against you somehow. And I think there are great examples on things like, you were a refugee once, you escaped your country, and now you go back to your country and things turn bad again. Then suddenly you are in this. There is this universally accessible list of of vulnerable populations, right? Because you belong to this religion and you live in that place, and then suddenly, because you were a refugee once and you had your reputation online, suddenly that becomes a tool of oppression. I think we need to be careful of that.
Do you think we need to legislate against that?
I don't think the problem is the legislation. I think the problem is that be very, very careful of whatever information you put on chain, and avoid putting personal information on chain at all costs. And I think that comes back to privacy, right? That comes back to having, like, if you can have an attestation, it's probably better to have an off-chain attestation that just says, look, I've been carrying this signature that I can share with other people, than just to have a central attestation thing on the blockchain, right? So just give people proof and not necessarily put them on the blockchain. So that's one important message to people who are thinking about on-chain reputations.
So I would say don't legislate against what you can do, but legislate against informing users of what they are doing. And that's kind of like something that I think will probably happen in the future now, because how would I know as, particle physicist who can't even start my email, whether or not the information I'm submitting is going on chain, or whether or not it's going in, let's just say even a layer 2 chain, or whether or not it's just going to not be committed in that way. Like, how do I know this? Like, how would I be able to determine that? And I don't feel like app developers will do that responsibly, especially since there's value in not doing it responsibly.
I think we need to. I think our goal here, as like we are technical writers, you have a technical podcast. Our goal here is to educate developers and try to teach them how to do it responsibly. Otherwise, we'll end up with legislation, right? I think it would be better for everyone if app developers are simply responsible and don't do things like that, so that we don't need to end up having some sort of legislation forced upon us by people who don't really understand all the subtleties of the system and ends up killing good ideas among with the bad ones.
Yeah, I hate to be the cynical one in the room, but I have malware bytes on my computer because there's a lot of asshole developers out there. And I think there's always going to be asshole developers who find a way to get something on chain, which is dirty, and will try to either blackmail, extort, or, I don't even know how they would blackmail it. But like, it's just like responsibility on the hands of developers. Developers, not only, even good developers make mistakes, I feel like we're that's something that ultimately will lead to legislation, whether or not we want it to. And I agree with you that little legislation is better, but we need liability in the system in order to take action against.
I sort of agree with you, but I would say that the reason that we are in this situation is exactly because we have a bunch of information in central databases that were collected by people, and that every time the user logins into something, they don't care about their own where the data is leaked in. And we are sort of like, there is this wave of legislation trying to come in with developers. I'm not saying that all legislation is bad. I'm not like a radical libertarian, but my point is that there are people who are trying to just say, let's just stop it on that front. But I think you can do it on the other front and say, look, the main problem here is that users are like, browsers are insecure. Is that we are building a system where data is not stored under the user's control, but it's stored on machines, whoever, and we don't know who controls it. So one of the things we can try to do is give tools to users so that they can control their privacy and can be sure who is even accessing what information they are creating. And I think that's what I'm going with.
Yeah,
I see us needing nutrition labels to tell us what we're feeding the blockchain. I don't say we got to tell them what they can and can't do, but end users need to know.
The best place to have the nutritional label will probably be on your browser, not on the app layer, right? Will probably be something that you're running a browser and the browser tells you, look, here data is being leaked. Here is which information you are sharing, and here are the things we can do to avoid this, right? And I think that's where we can.
That's exactly what I'm currently working on at Status is providing that information in a local context, so people have much more understanding and guarantees around the information they spread. And when you build on infrastructure like this, you'll have emergent social behavior that is better for the whole as opposed to the individual who gains the data. If everyone holds their own data, they will eventually become used to understanding what data they expose when they interact with things. When you build things on a centralized infrastructure, that social behavior is not emergent because it's not up to it's an offloading of responsibility to someone else to handle that type of information. And that's why people act the way they do on the internet.
And I'm just going to say, I don't think the browser is the right place for it, because I don't think browser makers should be playing whack-a-mole with how DApp developers are trying to get around certain notifications. And I feel like ultimately the liability for any DApp you release is on the DApp developer, not the browser maker, and the end user needs to be informed. And I believe that the responsibility to inform your DApp users of what's going on in your DApp is ultimately up to the DApp developer, not the person who writes a browser. They should not be playing that job.
But I don't trust DApp developers. That's why I want my browser to be a shield. Because
you can have it on both fronts, but that's where the inconsistency of reporting comes in. So if you find that information is being submitted to the chain, and they didn't say, "Hey, your information is being submitted to the chain," there's liability on the DApp developer.
That's the beauty. That's the beauty. The value isn't held by the DApp developer ever. That's the whole point. Is that if they want to do something like that, if you hold the information and you hold the permissions to that information, you'll always know what the DApp is trying to do. That's the whole point. And so if as a DApp developer, your job is not to figure out all the potential ways in which you can screw somebody. It's just providing a service because you don't have control over all of the value. Your value is a transitional medium. You transform value of one kind to another kind. And if you don't do that properly, the user will know because they have control over all the data.
I think I just see too many attack vectors there.
Well,
so I don't know. We'll see how it plays out in reality.
Maybe that's a diatribes conversation we can have, Colin.
Yeah, like I don't trust developers just to be kind all the time. And I feel like if they can get your information somehow, they'll submit it on chain in a valid way. But if they can find a way to do it, where they're also submitting it into their information database, that's where I kind of like, okay, if we trust the chain, we also have to trust the DApp. I don't think that works. The DApp is a proxy for the chain. The chain itself is the truth, but we can't trust the developers and their code, and we need to put liability on them for behaving properly.
Well,
I think it can all be true, right? We can try to solve the problem on multiple fronts.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, there's no like one-stop shop solution for all of this. It's definitely a mixture of all things.
Yeah, and it's good to have people with multiple points of view on that and different ways of thinking and different trust models for their own internal ethos, because that's how we build better software. So yeah, I like this conversation.
Alex, how can people reach you?
I'm on Twitter, AVSA, and you can start there, and I'm probably in other places too.
And the website for Universal Logins?
universallogins.io.
Simple enough. Thanks for coming on the show. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks, man. It was great.
Thanks for the invitation. Bye-bye, Corey. Bye-bye, Colin.